Hi, everybody. Welcome to our live stream today. My name is Paul B.J. Ransbury. I'm the CEO of Aviation Performance Solutions. It's great having everybody here today. Just as a reminder that we're streaming live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. We're primarily monitoring the LinkedIn channel today. So if you do have questions, post them there. We're doing our best to watch the other channels as well. So today we have a very interesting topic. We're going to be discussing the role of simulation in jet upset training. We have one of the leading experts in the world on Airbus upset training, but this is going to be on simulation and for UPRT or upset training in general, so it applies to really anybody seeking or participating in simulator upset prevention and recovery training. So with that, let's go ahead and go over to our speakers here for today. And with me, we have our VP Flight Operations and Training, Clark Otter McNeese. Clark is joining us from our headquarters here in Arizona, and it's just great to have him. He's a former airline captain, spent 10 years with a major air carrier in the United States, most of that time as a captain. Also from the U.S. Navy, he was a F-18 fighter pilot, and he's been with APS here for, oh gosh, was it 16 years now, Otter? Is that right?
That's right.
And how many time master CFI are you in addition to being a CFI, CFII, MEI, AGI? How many times master CFI?
Yeah, I think it's 5 now.
5-time master CFI. Okay. Well, wonderful. Well, we have an amazing guest with us here today. Would you like to go ahead and introduce Brad for us?
Yeah, I am super excited to be working with Brad again. Not only is Brad a friend, but a fellow warrior, shall we say, working with us to help mitigate loss of control in flight. It's been neat to work with him really since for the last 8 years when we started our relationship, because it was he and 4 of the other senior instructors at South African Airways came to us here in Phoenix to kind of begin their leading edge program at the airline. Brad, one of the reasons that he was chosen at that airline was because of his unique background. He owned and ran an aerobatic team for 20 years in the Extra 300 and did lots of air shows. He's been with South African Airways for 20 plus years as well, 18,000 plus hours. He's, again, training captain on the A320, was a demo display pilot on the 320, 330, 340. So, but most interesting, I think, will be to get his insight as he went nearly full time into developing their airline's UPRT in the simulator. And that's what we're going to draw on and hear some of his testimonies. I think it's going to be a fun time. We've got lots of videos that we'll play along the way as well. So, Brad, it's great to have you joining us from South Africa, where it's winter time there, right? Whoop.
Looks like you're on mute, Brad.
Okay, how about a sound check now?
There we go.
Is that a bit better? Sorry, I've got a brand new iPad, and it's got a funny setting here for sound. But yeah, it's great to be with you guys again. You know, we all speak the same language. We've learned a lot from you guys over the past 8 years. It's actually coming up 9 years now. And, you know, we've trained 750 pilots just at South African Airways alone. And, of course, I was involved with the Mango training where we sent our pilots through APS for the instructor on aircraft training. It's cold winter and it's in the evening. I'd rather be in the summer, but it's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Not only are you a father of 2, but you grew up there, right? In South Africa?
That's correct. Yeah. Born and bred in South Africa, living in Johannesburg all my life. Started to learn to fly at the age of 16 at one of our little flying schools around the corner. We got quite a large general aviation population in South Africa and air show sort of circuit, you know, visiting air shows from a very young age. We're running pretty much around 20 to 30 air shows a year just in South Africa alone. So very large community of general aviation guys and guys interested in aerobatics. And then, of course, now with the upset training coming in, a huge amount of interest growing here in South Africa.
That's great. That's really awesome. And it's been fun these last 8 years because as we've worked together, you have helped the industry in numerous international working groups to help better understand the role of UPRT and its place, its appropriate place throughout a professional pilot's career there. And the simulator is absolutely critical in a professional pilot's not only overall training and skill, but it is valuable in UPRT as well. And we're going to highlight some of those areas. Let's go to the next slide, if we could.
Hey, Otter, you know what? I overlooked where we're coming from today at our headquarters. You're the guy that makes all the headquarters videos. You want to put a plug in that before we get to your next slide? That was my, I didn't do that in the opening, and I apologize. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is just kind of a little bit of a conception. You got some real pictures, some photos of our new headquarters here at the Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport. And we are so excited to be in it. 2 facilities, a main one and an expansion facility, but it's well done. It's comfortable, and it is unique to being able to provide the UPRT.
Awesome. And I put a link in the channel, so it's an open invitation to all you pilots out there wanting to come visit us. If you're in Phoenix, please just let us know and come by for a tour. We got our classrooms, virtual reality training, simulator training, piston jet, everything. It really is the nexus of UPRT excellence worldwide. So with that, Otter, now I will give you the slide that you asked for. Here you go.
All right. So before we get into our kind of the meat, I guess, shall we say, of talking about the role of the simulator in UPRT, I want to remind everybody, first of all, that remember, what is the purpose of UPRT? The purpose of UPRT is to mitigate loss of control in flight. And that is an aviator's #1 threat. Worldwide, almost every part of the industries, all segments of the industry, it is an aviator's #1 threat every time he climbs into an airplane. The industry stakeholders at large have decided and agreed that UPRT is the way to mitigate. Now, that UPRT has to be done a certain way. We can't do it like we've been doing the last 50 years. But this kind of touches on that, because what we're saying on this slide is there are certain things that need to be done in a UPRT program, including simulator, which will make it effective. First of all, we need to make sure that we're in the simulator that we adhere to the valid training envelope. And we have found over many years, as Brad can attest in his experience as well, many simulator instructors are completely unaware of the valid training envelope for their simulators. And there's been some changes now, because Part 121 for the FAA world requires pilots to experience an enhanced envelope, stall envelope. And so there's some unique things about that need to be understood. There's some improved UPRT iOS tools available for the instructor and all. In fact, I'd like to go to showing a video here real quickly that actually shows a simulator UPRT iOS page. On it, you're going to see 4 panels, VG diagram, alpha, beta plot. Anyway, BJ is going to actually narrate this video here to point out this kind of unique tool here. This happens to be off of a CAE Level D simulator. We actually helped CAE to develop this. But anyway, BJ, let's go ahead and play that.
This looks a little bit different than what you've likely seen so far in the course. What we see here is what's called a 4-plot. The 4-plot not only has the VG diagram, which is the topic of this particular module, but also has what's called an alpha-beta plot, which we'll discuss in a minute. These are the control column position. In other words, the control inputs by the pilots. And in fact, this particular one is an Airbus indication, which is why it doesn't look like a normal control column. That's a stick position. And then this is the primary flight display representation, so that the instructor at the station can see something similar to what the pilots are seeing from their particular position. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some of these features. So the integration allows the instructor to not only integrate their knowledge of the VG diagram, but also their knowledge of the alpha beta plot. The VG diagram is what primarily indicates the relationship between speed and G loading and plots it in relation to the flight envelope of the airplane. There's other indications in here we're going to look at in a little bit more detail. Unfortunately, the VG diagram on its own doesn't tell enough information to the pilot as to how safe or what fidelity the maneuver was being accomplished by. Also, the movement of the flight controls can give indication from a technique standpoint to help the instructor be aware of something happening that could be interpreted as incorrect technique. And we'll talk about the colors also help the instructor as well. Again, when the instructor is looking at the iOS, it's important that he or she sees what's going on with the flight condition of the airplane, so the primary flight display is here.
You know, I'm excited about this advancement in simulator UPRT with that information that can be presented to an appropriately qualified UPRT instructor. Brad, you might have some thoughts on that as well, but there's a lot of information there that can be used in a very effective way to help pilots not only better understand upsets, but how proper way of recovering. And BJ made a couple of interesting remarks in there. For instance, about the VG diagram. The VG diagram alone will not allow you to understand whether you did a safe, effective recovery. There is other information that you need, such as the alpha beta plot, and even looking at the flight controls and things. So anyway, do you want to share any thoughts on that tool there, Brad?
Well, when we started developing UPRT in 2012, our simulators didn't have any UPRT upgrade packages, and the iOS certainly didn't have any enhancements that we could use. But we made use of a company that was able to feed in a link from the computer to an iPad, which would then show those 4 diagrams or those 4 boxes that you've just shown now on the iOS. So that was like the prelude to the simulator companies developing proper iOSs for UPRT. So obviously the instructor has to be properly trained on how to use that iOS because it involves quite a lot of aerodynamic principles there, such as the VG diagram. The instructors obviously have to know what the alpha beta envelope is and how it's used and how it's developed in the industry and how it's engineered. But what we found in the beginning was we were training on 3 simulators. It was a 320 simulator, 330 simulator, and an Airbus 737-800 simulator. And only the one simulator actually had an enhanced iOS. So we had to go and work out the validated training envelope for the other simulators and make sure that we don't exceed any of those parameters during training. And obviously that comes back down to the importance of instructor training so that they know at any stage when the aeroplane is exceeding its validated training envelope, so they can obviously pause the simulator, point that out, or redo the exercises. But what we did find was that, especially in the Airbus, it was very difficult in the simulators that did not have an enhanced iOS for instructors to actually pick up what the pilots were doing because of the side stick. We had situations where the pilot might need to unload and push forward on the side stick. And unless the instructor himself is trained properly to monitor that at a critical stage of an upset where there's a lot happening in the simulator, you'll probably miss what the pilot's inputs are going to be unless he's got an enhanced iOS. We found situations where the pilot under training would need to unload by pushing forward on the side stick. And when you actually ask him, are you unloading? He'd say yes. And when you ask him to release the side stick, you could actually see that he was pulling back on the side stick. Now, that's not easy to see as an instructor. But once we upgraded our other simulators as legislation took place, it was much easier to monitor what the guys were doing. It obviously was easier to pick up any cyclic inputs on the controls, which is also very difficult to do when you're not actually sitting in the seat with your feet as an instructor on the rudder pedals, as an example. Very difficult to see that if the pilots are putting in cyclic movements. And it made also debriefing a lot easier because a lot of the time during an upset, the pilot's mental or ability to absorb information is limited because he's so busy trying to concentrate on a whole new aspect to his flying career, and they can't remember exactly what went on. So we would be able to replay a lot of those events, show the pilots under training the mistakes that were made, obviously let them refly that, and quite a lot of the times the pilots were quite surprised to see the inputs that actually put onto the flight controls at the time of an upset,
Those are great comments. And I'd like to just add that, and you kind of touched on it there in the debriefs, is a lot of times I find myself when I'm instructing pilots as well in the simulator, and we're trying to debrief on how, say, a particular recovery went or something like that, sometimes you can end up in a little bit of match, shall we say, because you tell them, well, this is what you did, and they're going, nah, I don't think so. I think I really was unloading. And like you said, you get to show them. Yeah, no, you really didn't. So it really gives a lot of power to the instructor to help lay down what actually happened.
Yeah, one of the problems that we have in the industry that I'd just like to mention is that I know the FAA has mandated Part 121 simulator upgrades for UPRT, but it is mandated in many other parts of the world as well, but just not implemented because of costing. In some parts of Africa, in South Africa as well, we have simulators that are eventually end up getting approved for UPRT, but they don't have the enhanced instructor station. So one has to look at what to do there, and it's pretty simple from my experience, is that you have to have a properly trained instructor who has gone through an on-aircraft training program, who understands the physiological effects that occur during a startle event or an event where you're under a lot of G, where things are happening that you've never seen before. And you've got to have an instructor that's able to work out by looking at the maneuver itself, whether the aeroplane has exceeded its validated training envelope, whether the flight control inputs have been appropriate, etc. And of course, that's if you don't have an IOS to aid you. But it's a problem that we're finding in many parts of the world that we train in, is that a lot of the airlines or operators that are providing simulators are just not able to finance the the simulator upgrade packages for this, which results in the authorities not really knowing what to do about that problem, but going ahead and monitoring and approving simulators that are not that don't have this enhanced IOS. So it comes down really to a properly trained instructor that is able to see and monitor whether the correct recovery techniques have taken place without exceeding the alpha beta envelope limitations or the the VG diagram, etc., etc.
Right. Brad, every time I talk to you, I'm like, man, you sound so cool with that accent. I know everybody was going to love listening to you more than me. So, all right.
Well, I hope that everybody can understand what I'm saying. I remember visiting United Airlines with you, Otto, a few years ago, and it was my turn to stand up and introduce myself and set the tone for how this training was going to take place. And I was talking to this group of 5 highly qualified instructors, and I really thought I had their attention because they were staring at me and they looked so interested in what I was saying. And when I finished the small part of the debriefing, the only comment I got was, "Man, that guy talks funny."
Yeah, I believe it.
So I've had to learn a few Americanisms and etc. But
okay. That's good. All right, let's go back to our assumptions real quickly. We do believe, again, a good simulator program is going to have appropriate training in the valid training envelope. Now, there also needs to be appropriate academic training to go with it. And the simulator instructors have got to be qualified as well. There's a number of things that we believe a good simulator UPRT instructor needs to have been trained in, such as experiencing on aircraft. And you kind of mentioned that just a little bit ago. Also completing a robust UPRT instructor qualification course, and being QA'd, because instructor drift is a real problem right now. The major airlines that we're partnered with, that's exactly what they're seeing. As soon as they get their instructors qualified, man, they are just slowly but surely starting to diverge off of the proper path there. So, and you saw that as well, didn't you, in your program? And in fact, I think you ultimately decided that you had to restrict the number of instructors. Isn't that right? Your core UPRT instructors, because of that drift problem.
That's correct. So we ended up initially sending around 8 instructors to APS to do the on-aircraft instructor upgrade program. And obviously they came back and completed a further between 15 and 20 hours of training before they started presenting the program. And we were halfway through our program for the year, 300 pilots trained, and we suddenly realized that, hang on, these guys are going to have to do stall training every 6 months, and it's not going to be a UPRT instructor that's giving them stall training. And now our pilots had learned a strategy which would help them cope under stress and startle, and this strategy entailed verbalizing a certain words and applying a very well understood and trained technique. But the instructors that were now giving our normal proficiency checks were not UPRT trained instructors. So what we decided to do was to actually, we conducted an experiment where we tried to train instructors that hadn't done on-aircraft training, that hadn't been through a full comprehensive on-aircraft training program, to just give the basics of upset training in terms of stall recovery and perhaps a nose high and a nose low, basic recovery as part of a 6-monthly cycle, just so that the students can practice the strategy. And we trained around 30 to 40 instructors, who some of them had a little bit of on-aircraft all-attitude experience, but most of them were just your line instructors who flew an Airbus for their living and never flew outside the airline. And what we found is that initially, one would have thought that, well, I thought that they'd grasped the concept of what we were trying to teach. And they demonstrated that after about 2 simulator sessions that they had grasped the concept. And we gave them about 2 or 3 weeks of training and or letting them train the line. And when we got back to monitoring them, the instructor drift was huge, because they're faced with questions from the students that they're actually unable to answer because they don't have the experience. So they rely on what they think how they think they should answer, and then that creates the drift. You start ending up with guys developing their own ideas about how things should go. And we actually just found that it was detrimental to the whole program, and stopped that training immediately. The instructors were obviously able to carry out your normal stall training that took place every 6 months, but we certainly weren't able to let them carry on with the UPRT program, simply because they just had not had that volume of training that is required for an instructor to give UPRT.
That's great. That's great insight. Let's move on to our next slide. We've got some more videos that I want to get to here. And I want to just kind of lay the groundwork here. And BJ, if you don't mind, let's go to the next slide. Hopefully.
Otter, maybe before you do that, Chris from Halldale had a question about how do you select your UPRT sim instructors? And Brad, you did an experiment on that as well. Would you mind just addressing that very briefly? I know you guys have a lot to talk about, but that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So, we had to be fair in our airline to give every instructor an opportunity to apply to become a UPRT instructor. And we initially discussed guys that had aerobatic experience and all-attitude experience and military background as being the guys that we would choose. But that proved a little bit unfair on the guys that didn't have that opportunity in their flying career. So we decided to choose to select half the instructors who had a lot of all-attitude experience, and half our instructors who had no all-attitude experience whatsoever. Pretty much had done a spin and a stall in an airplane a long time ago. And obviously, having sent them to APS with a very comprehensive on-aircraft training program, we really found that it really boils down to the enthusiasm to do the job. How passionate are they about teaching UPRT? And they got stuck in and they learned the theory. They absorbed every bit of information that they could when they were at APS. And then when they got back to South African Airways, it did take those guys about one simulator session longer to become proficient in delivering our program than the guys that had the all-attitude experience. And I'm sure that's self-explanatory. But I would say, you know, if you're going to look at instructors in your organization, look at how passionate they are for the subject, and that makes the world a difference. As long as they receive the proper training.
So I know I don't want to derail your talk track here, guys, but I think we got some good questions coming in. So if you don't mind, I'm going to put one more into the stream. Sure. And it's from our good friend, Chris Provencio. He's the Chief Safety Officer at Textron. And I think it's a very fair question because it's related to what you're talking about here, Brad. So let me just go ahead and bring it in. And he's talking here about the transferability. And I think that the Airbus is a great example because it's such a technologically advanced airplane. I mean, I flew it for a number of years, but the fly-by-wire flight envelope protections, all the reversion mode, and it really would be a great testimonial to determine, I think, from you, Brad, how valuable and transferable was the training from the extra. I do understand that it's largely about instruction, but would you mind addressing that a little bit, Brad, before we move on? Sorry, guys.
Yeah, sure. So the on-aircraft training we found very important. We were unable to afford to send all our pilots, our line pilots, for an on-aircraft training course, obviously because of our location, et cetera. So we made sure that our instructors had the on-aircraft training and the full program from APS. They then, what was taught on aircraft is probably around 80% of the syllabus that's perfectly transferable into any aircraft you fly. It involves the psychological factors, the startle events. The instructors that are doing on-aircraft training are able to experience the effect of fight or flight, and how debilitating that can be to a crew. And they're able to transfer that information successfully to the line crew who don't have the opportunity to then experience that because they've experienced it themselves. And we found proof.
Oop, we just lost you, Brad. Oop.
Just do
there you go.
Here.
We got you.
Okay, am I back again?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, so we had a crew who had suffered an upset, which was a severe overspeed. An overspeed so great that no simulator could really simulate that significant overspeed, which presented major startle to the crew. The crew they were line crew. They hadn't experienced on-aircraft training, but they had been properly trained by an instructor that had. This crew experienced major startle, not only from the overspeed, they also misidentified a procedure that applied to that specific aeroplane, which then put the aeroplane into alternate law, which then got it into a situation where the speed decayed to a point of stalling. As soon as they had recognized the fact that it was an upset, the recognition was the big thing. They'd been trained in recognition, and they recognized an upset was occurring. They were able to then apply the strategy immediately with confidence because they'd been trained in it, and that pulled them out of that whole fight or flight situation into where they literally they experienced so much fear. It was quite significant. You will never experience that in a simulator because of the very nature of simulators. But it pulled them out of that situation and put them into a position where they could apply their training and apply the strategy to then recover. And Otto will talk about the webinar that's available if you want to find out more about that information. But also to answer Chris's question is, we stopped flying 737-800s a few years ago, and we took the guys who had been flying conventional aircraft and trained them in UPRT on the Airbus, and it's perfectly transferable. The skills were picked up immediately, very little extra training required. There were obviously the nuances of an Airbus that one had to understand with regards to the laws, etc. But it's a perfectly transferable skill across almost any platform.
And let me just add
the way it's taught today, please.
Yeah. And well, let me just add real quickly, because you're bringing up a point that we haven't addressed yet, and that is the use of a strategy, especially a recovery strategy. And we're both going to come to the conclusion that it is a critical component to a good UPRT program. And it is a tool that pilots need to have in a time-critical, life-threatening situation. Now, that strategy that you use or you teach to pilots, one of the nice things about the on-aircraft training component is you can show the pilots the value of the strategy in a real airplane. And then you can get in the simulator and now show them, look, strategy still works. So very transferable knowledge and skill sets there.
Great.
Okay, let's move on. BJ, did you want to say something to that?
Well, do you guys want to move on or just take one more point? Philip Adrian made a really good point here. I don't know if you know Philip, Brad, good friends
Yes.
of ours.
Hey, Philip, are you still living in the Netherlands?
I think it was Texas last I heard him. But anyway, it's not a question, but it's a good point. Let me bring it in. And I think that Philip makes a really good point about the fact that there is a substantial difference between prevention and recovery, and that, the best recovery is never being there in the first place, obviously. But I think his last point is extremely important, is that you don't have to have extended envelope devices to be able to provide effective upset prevention and recovery training. And in fact, with an effectively trained crew, Brad, which you proved, the iOS is really a bonus. But I think in the hands of the unqualified instructor, there's a much higher risk of exiting the fidelity envelope and potentially providing negative training. Did you guys want to talk to that really briefly? Then I promise I won't bring any more questions in for a while.
You want to say something to that, and then I'll say something, Brad.
Yeah, I'm just reading the last bit of the question. Sorry, BJ. What was your question there?
Go ahead, Otter, if you want to take it. There is no question. His point is that you don't need to have the enhanced iOS, nor need to have extended envelopes. In many cases, not even motion to provide the lion's share of effective transferable upset prevention recovery training in a simulator. It really does circle back to the instructor. And so I think I was only bringing in Philip's point because it was really on mark, because there is often a tendency to feel that the device is the solution, but in reality, it's the instructor that's the solution. And as long as you're operating within the fidelity envelope of said simulator and you're providing transferable technique as the instructor, that you can provide a very positive transferable training experience, whether that's on aircraft, a non-type specific simulator, or a non-enhanced advanced simulator, such as a fixed base simulator like MPS creates, or a CAE simulator, for example. So Otter, did you want to add anything to that? We don't need to dwell here. I just wanted to make sure we brought emphasis to that point.
Well, his first point, there absolutely is a difference between prevention and recovery. The whole point of UPRT is prevention, and I know Philip totally agrees with that, and that absolutely is the goal. One of the things we've seen is that the better you are at recovery, then you tend to be better at prevention there as well. Now, to the other point about the iOS device, absolutely, 99% of the simulators, especially the level C, level D simulators that are out there, can be used highly effectively to teach these critical UPRT concepts and skills in the hands of an appropriately trained UPRT instructor. And it takes a little bit longer. I would say this, it'll take a little bit longer to train a good UPRT instructor to use the simulator that does not have the iOS tool, UPRT tool, but it absolutely can be done. So, Brad, you want to say anything to that?
Yeah, 100%. Our 73800 simulator for a long time didn't have an extended envelope. It didn't have an iOS that could help the instructor. We decided initially in line with what Airbus recommended was to switch off the motion and use it as a fixed base sort of trainer. We obviously found that the benefit of having the stall buffet on a simulator where there is an enhanced stall model was very beneficial for the students. So there are parts of the training where the motion is switched back on so that the students can learn to recognize the characteristics of stalls at low altitudes as well as at high altitudes, because high altitude stalls are quite different in terms of the recovery technique is very similar, but the length of time it takes to recover from a stall is significantly longer, and the amount of buffet that one experiences is a lot higher as well. So there was definitely a benefit to having motion, but you need a properly trained instructor to be able to teach UPRT if you don't have a proper iOS.
Great. Okay, let's move on. Next slide. So, overall, the role of the simulator in UPRT will be transfer of skill to hopefully take the good on aircraft training that a pilot had or received earlier, and now he's going to transfer those knowledge sets and core skill sets and that discipline methodology to a type specific platform there, or class of aircraft, which would be appropriate in a pilot's progression or career progression. We feel that that's probably one of the best ways, and that's the integrated approach. That's what ICAO recognized. IATA as well is integrating the simulator with on-aircraft UPRT.
The only thing I was going to add there, Otter, is that although we advocate the integrated approach as the organizations do that you talk about, simulator-only upset prevention and recovery training does have a significant mitigation of the threat that Brad can testify to with qualified instructors. So I just want to be sure that we're not saying integrated is the only way. It just happens to mitigate the threat more than doing only on aircraft or only on simulators. So there is tremendous value in either approach, optimum together, but here we're talking about the role of simulation in UPRT. And
it's a great emphasis point, because that is exactly what Brad got to see with his crews, especially his A340 incident that one of his crew had. And you already talked about it briefly there, Brad. We have a link that BJ can put up to the webinar on this particular Airbus 340 incident over the Swiss Alps that the audience can watch at some point. But great, thank you. But Brad, maybe you could just touch briefly on the fact that these guys had not been through on-aircraft UPRT prior to this incident, this successful recovery that they did, but it was based on extensive simulator UPRT there. So you want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, so it really is a testament to the instructors that were involved in training the crew, and I suppose the kind of training that they'd had over time. A little bit of background: the captain of the flight, it was his first solo international flight in the airline. He'd been a domestic captain on Boeings for a very long time. He had just been signed out on Airbus, so it was still relatively new to him. And it was his first long-haul flight, commanding the aircraft by himself with his crew. It was very early hours of the morning, and they experienced a severe wind shear, or should I say mountain wave, over the Swiss Alps that resulted in about a 50-knot drop in tailwind. That then caused the airplane to descend slightly, but it caused a major overspeed. If I can remember correctly, the speed trend vector on the PFD was up to around 0.92 or 0.94, somewhere around there. So it was a huge overspeed. They'd never seen that in a simulator before. They'd only had simulator UPRT training. They'd been trained properly in the strategy. Our simulator training initially kicked off with a full 4-hour session of training, of which about 3 hours, 2.5 hours of that is really training the strategy and understanding how to apply it. We obviously go into initially maneuver-based training, and then later on in the simulator session, we give a couple of scenarios which they can apply what they've learned. The confidence levels of the students from the time they get in to the time that they leave that simulator session improves dramatically as they start learning to apply the strategy and to see that the strategy worked in every upset that they got into, provided it was applied correctly. So the crew had not had on-aircraft training. They had never been past 60 degrees of bank for many, many years. One of the crew had never been past 60 degrees of bank in his life in a real airplane, but he had been taught this properly in a simulator. So he was able to, he had never felt that kind of startle before. He had never felt the situation of his mental capacity decreasing to such a point that he could not think anymore because of the fear that he was feeling as this whole scenario developed, and he was unable to work out what this airplane was doing until he heard the stall warning go off. The stall warning for him was a cue. It triggered the word triggered the idea of upset. At that specific moment, one of the crew, the in-flight relief pilot, was sitting in the jump seat, and he looked forward, saw the situation, and he verbalized upset, and he verbalized the strategy. And the captain said that was the first time that he was able to almost identify what was going on, and he was in a situation where he felt he could regain control of the situation and then regain control of the airplane. And these guys, as I said, had not experienced on-aircraft training. I know we had talked about it over many occasions, Otto, about how is this going to work in an Airbus when it really happens? Because we hadn't had post some of the accidents that took place. We hadn't seen the proof in the pudding in terms of, is a real crew under severe startle, apply the strategy, is it going to work like we think it is? And it was a testament to the training that they received, the on-aircraft training from APS, the design of the strategy in terms of pulling those guys out of a major startle situation into being able to fly the airplane, calm down, recover, and they carried out a successful landing in Frankfurt about an hour later in Cat 3 conditions.
That's great. BJ?
Yeah, hey guys, I got another question here from Ben Kohler. He's on the MBAA Safety Committee, and it's a really good one, and I think this is an appropriate time to bring it in. I was just wondering if you guys could talk about, as you both know, that the APS strategy has been designed around industry guidance to map directly into OEM methods, the templates by ICAO, FAA, EASA, and so APS by design ensures all of its techniques and strategies are transferable. But I think the challenge we have is the strategy and the 4 words is a minor part of the implementation of the strategy. There's really a huge amount of training that's required behind it to be able to effectively apply it in a real world event, for example, like Brad is talking about. So I'm more talking to give you time, guys, to articulate a response. So over to you guys, and then we'll move on. And I apologize again for, going off your talk track here. Go ahead, guys.
No, this is a great question. I'm glad it's brought up. Thanks, Ben. For us specifically, we were very concerned in early years of developing, especially our strategies and all that, that it would be well received, certainly by the OEMs, and we've made concerted effort to get the OEMs out here. I remember when Boeing and Airbus came out, Captains Dave Carbon and Larry Rockcliffe came out to go through our program and experience, and they gave us the thumbs up with it. They shared their concerns. And they laid the emphasis points on where we need to make sure that we don't teach certain things and get caught in some negative training. And certainly it's been great for us ever since. And I think, Brad, your team was able to actually benefit from it there 8 years ago. You want to touch on your work with Airbus even over the last number of years?
Well, yeah, in answer to Ben's question, in 2012, when we started speaking to Airbus about the upset prevention training program, we were met with a little bit of resistance in terms of the recovery plan, the recovery from an upset. Obviously, they wanted a lot of focus on prevention, which is highly understandable. But their biggest concern, I think, was how are instructors going to be teaching this? They had highly experienced test pilots putting their airplanes through the flight envelope to develop the validated training envelope, and they were worried that the instructors were not going to be teaching, or basically going to be doing their own thing and not teaching, making sure that the airplane remained within the validated training envelope. In other words, the instructors were possibly not going to be qualified enough to be teaching recovery. Obviously, we discussed this with the manufacturers at length. We were obviously involved with APS, and we sent our training manuals to Airbus. We had a lot of comments, a lot of meetings on webinars where we discussed certain aspects of the training. But we got a lot of good buy-in with regards to the strategy. And if you look at the way that the strategy is applied, it's 100% in line with the OEM's recommendations. And we obviously have to make sure that happens. As long as it's within the recommendations of the OEM, we can train. And if you look at pre-2012, the way that the stall training was conducted, with an emphasis on minimum height loss, things have changed a lot, and the strategy addresses that perfectly. And you can see the OEMs have redeveloped or rewritten the techniques to recover from stalls from many years ago, with emphasis on the fact that minimum height loss is not the most important thing. Yeah, unloading the aeroplane, making sure that you've got a controllable aeroplane that you can then carry on flying it post stall is more important.
Right, BJ.
So I would only add that I think what you had said earlier, Otter, and what Brad's alluding to is the fact that we have evolved our strategy based on feedback and input from the OEMs. And in fact, that particular meeting you were talking about, Otter, with Boeing and Airbus, when they were here with their UPRT leaders, was that we actually changed our strategy. We evolved it into a less complicated approach. But I will say that the devil's in the details. Just because you have 4 words of push, roll, power, stabilize, or push, power, roll, stabilize, which is the variant, is that it doesn't mean you're trained in any way. It requires robust implementation. There's always exceptions. There's unique considerations of secondary flight controls. For example, like in the Airbus, a selection of flaps 1 is an important step in certain situations, like in the stall. And so the point of it is that the strategy is a very different approach than a technique or a procedure. A strategy is a new approach to being able to be highly dynamic and effective in a time-critical, complicated situation that requires intensive training that Brad has seen and that we see. So sorry, guys, I'm gonna pull the question out. Anything to add before I bring you back to your slides?
No, I just say we worked with Cessna and Embraer, and even Chris Provencio, who asked a question earlier. He's the safety officer for Textron, so he certainly would be a good one to reach out to in terms of his opinions of what he's seen. Let's jump now to the next slide, if we could. There, I've got a little bit more information. I definitely want to get out here quickly. I got some more videos. This purpose of this slide is simply to highlight some of the areas, unique areas to these different platforms of instruction. And when you look at academic, on aircraft, and simulator, this, if you were to take a UPRT program and combine all of this, that would be called the integrated approach. And that's what ICAO said is the #1 way to mitigate loss of control in flight. Now, academics, of course, is going to help the pilots understand some of the all-attitude concepts, help understand things like negative roll damping, and to better fully comprehend the role of the strategy. There, you can't just tell a pilot, all right, we're going to go out in the airplane, and every time you encounter, I give you an upset, I want you to just say push, roll, power, stabilize. You can't do that. There's each of those mental trigger words is a wealth of understanding and information and skill that has to be developed, and it can only be developed over time. We have fully seen you cannot develop the skills you need in one day, or really even long-lasting skills. Even in 2 or 3 flights, you need more than that. Actually, we see 4 as a minimum. But in any case, academics are vital. Appropriate UPRT academics. The industry said, listen, we can't teach academics. We can't teach aerodynamics like we've been doing for 50 years because it's not adequate. It's not giving the pilots the requisite core knowledge sets that they need to help mitigate the threat. The other component is on aircraft. Here, getting in an all attitude, all envelope capable airplane, and being able to go through these various types of upsets and practice not only seeing how the airplane goes into the upsets, because that better gives the pilot prevention skills, but also how to recover as well. Experiencing these psychophysiological issues in a real airplane puts you in the real psychological domain of an actual airborne upset. And then from there, going out, transferring those skills to the simulator there. And that's what I want to touch more on now on this next slide. Let's go there, if we could, BJ.
Yeah, Otter, if you don't mind, very often people say, well, what is the value of these particular domains of training, these platforms? And so APS has developed over the decades we've been doing this, what is called the quantitative loss control mitigation criteria. So while it's not perfect, and it really largely depends on how the training is implemented, is that we see, for example, based on that particular system, that academics alone is about a 17% mitigation. Simulator, actually on aircraft alone, is about a 76% mitigation. Simulator training alone is about a 43% mitigation, and combined they max out at about a 92% mitigation. So as we talked about earlier in our prep, is that the event you face really depends on how successful you're going to be. So it really does vary based on the type of training you have in relation to the particular event you face. But given 100 airplane upsets, that's your likelihood of success if you have to pick one of these and move on. So sorry, Otter, I will now go to your next slide. Do you have anything to add on that before I do?
No. Brad, did you want to talk to that a minute?
No, that's good.
Okay, so let's go to the second part of this slide here, talk about some of the unique features of the simulator's role. One of the great features of the simulator that I learned early on in delivering UPRT in a simulator, and that is the freeze and steady. The ability to now actually put the airplane in the middle of the upset, actually freeze it, and now give the pilot a chance to actually look around and absorb, because that's really not done many times. As well as I know, Brett, that when simulator instructors are giving their pilots their unusual attitude training, it's typically viewed as a maneuver space. All right, you in the left seat, here's yours. Here we go. All right, recover, and all right, any questions? Okay, next, here's you in the right seat, and off they go. Boom, recover. Okay, boom, and it's a matter of minutes, and it's over. It's over, and there's very little discussion going on throughout it there. Brad, before I let you go into your thoughts on this, let's play this video here that I did just yesterday, actually, just to kind of show what we're talking about.
Again, one of the great things about the simulator is being able to put the airplane into various upsets and then freeze it. And this allows the pilots, or it allows you as the instructor, to be able to point out some very important areas. We know that a lot of simulators have presets that you can use to put the airplane in, say, certain unusual attitudes. Flying the simulator, or flying the airplane into the upset as well, is very valid and increases your diversity of upsets as well. So I'm going to do that now. Right now we're about 2,000 feet above the ground here. I'm going to put us in a nose low over banked upset. We're just stable level flight, and I'm just going to roll the airplane pretty expeditiously here until we get over banked and the nose drops. And here we are. Now you notice I have frozen the simulator, and this is awesome training, because not a lot of pilots have had that opportunity where they where the simulator instructor lets the pilot now just kind of analyze and absorb what he sees. Interestingly enough, in real life, if a pilot were to encounter something like this, it could be very challenging, especially where the attitude indicator is, where ground and sky is, and all of that. It could be very confusing. So this gives an opportunity for them to really absorb that. And we can see blue sky on the right and ground on the left, and it correlates with the attitude indicator. You want to give the pilots a chance to correlate those views there. It's important to teach recognition and confirmation of the upset as well. It's important to talk about now the potential human factors related, especially related to star startle and fear. Get the pilot to think about how he might react here, especially with a face full of dirt over the nose and losing altitude. There's going to be a natural tendency to want to start pulling here, and we certainly cannot do that here. So there's a lot that can be introduced in the freeze mode, and it's an excellent tool in the simulator.
Brad, you want to share some of your thoughts on that freeze tool?
Yeah. When a crew arrives for their first UPRT simulator session, as I said earlier on, they probably haven't been or seen the Airbus flown past 45 degrees of bank, maybe 60 degrees of bank. And this is the first time that they're going to be experiencing certain attitudes that they haven't seen ever. In order to effectively train a strategy and let them recognize the situation, we have to use a building block approach for most of the crew, because there's so much information that is coming at them. They've just had a huge briefing, they've studied their academics, they're getting into the simulator now, and there's a lot of information that's coming at them. We found that having the ability to freeze the sim and let them relax and see what let them absorb what they're seeing, and realize that this is a recoverable situation because you've told them so, and you're going to teach them how to get out of the situation and how to mitigate the loss of control. They can then start relaxing while the simulator is on freeze, and you can now start applying the building block approach. They're listening to you because they're not trying to fly the airplane or watch the airplane being flown at the time and watch what you're doing. And having that ability to freeze and then to just discuss, let them get used to the situation. Maybe even ask them, what do they feel they should be doing in that situation? What are the risks that are involved? Let them think about it, because once they see that attitude, they start developing an idea of what sort of risks are going to occur, how they would normally react. Most of them wouldn't know how they would react because they've never seen that attitude before. But a lot of them would say, well, for instance, in this video, I'm just going to pull the stick back because that saves my life, you know, and then have the ability to discuss that. And why it could be certain counterintuitive things could be the correct things to do. Having that ability to freeze the simulator gives them the time to take that in, think about it. You can then carry out the recovery maneuver. You can then put them into the same upset again and freeze it again. Let them think about what you've just taught them, test their understanding. Did they understand what you said correctly before they then go and apply their own techniques? And it's an invaluable tool in the simulator.
Great inputs. Let's go back to the slide here a second, if we could, unless there's a question. Okay. So freeze and steady, definitely very, very important tool and unique to the simulator, because you can't do it in the aircraft, in the on-aircraft training there. Another great uniqueness is being able to put the pilots now in, for instance, like low altitude scenarios. I mean, you can't do that legally or safely in real airplanes when you're practicing upsets in on aircraft. So putting them in low altitude or IFR or night conditions, definitely important. Certainly not something you necessarily want to do in the beginning of UPRT. As Brad correctly said, there needs to be a building block approach. There needs to be a stepping stone approach here. You've got to go from maneuvers-based training to then scenario-based. And you need the pilots to develop a certain competence and confidence in executing the strategy, consistently and effectively and all that, before you would want to then put them in these more challenging environments there. Let's go ahead and play this next video, and then I'll give you a chance to share a couple of thoughts there, Brad, on it.
And just confirm it's the night weather, low altitude one, Honor, that you want?
Yes, sir.
And here we are now actually in the same upsat, but now we can actually put the pilots either in bad weather or at night or both, and in this case we're even quite low to the ground. This allows us to transfer skills that maybe we've developed in the on-aircraft UPRT, but we have to do in day VFR. So again, the simulator is just an excellent tool to provide a wide range of critical types of upsets. So let's go ahead and see if I can recover and survive this one. Here we go. Unload, roll. And here we go, pulling out.
Terrain.
And we are stable. Woo. I missed the ground by 120 feet.
Okay, so I will throw in here, Brad. One of the values of freezing a sim, especially in these diverse upsets, is developmental modeling, and that's one of the goals as well in on-aircraft UPRT and forcing pilots to look outside the window and even practice recovering the airplane using outside reference as well as inside. It's important for developing these mental models that are now transferable to real upsets there, and the simulator can be very effective at doing that, especially if you're VFR or VMC conditions there. Now we're talking about more severe upsets, for instance, or more critical upsets, maybe at night. And in the bad weather, and they're going to be using instruments, and the instruments should be their primary way to recover anyway. All right, and we're not saying recover by looking out the window. That's not what we're saying here. We're professional pilots should, in general, be using the instruments to recover, but there is something that can be done during the UPRT process that helps develop better mental models than just using instruments.
Yeah, and it was a good example of the video that you showed there of a low altitude overbank situation, which could occur from anything from an engine failure to weight turbulence or any other catastrophic type of failure, or probably even disorientation, as we've seen in one or two of the accidents that have occurred over the past few years. We introduced that exercise right at the end of our training, when the crew have built a certain level of confidence in being able to use that strategy. And, it's not, the simulator is beneficial there because you're not going to see that kind of recovery that low to the ground, I suppose, in any airplane, unless, of course, you're doing on-aircraft training, which most of the crew don't have the privilege of doing.
Yeah, that's
is to build the confidence to enable the crew to apply the strategy low to the ground, possibly in a dirty configuration, low energy state, after takeoff, etc. And the crew, you can certainly see that there's a significant more amount of startle or pressure to think quickly because of the fact that you are lower to the ground, which the simulator enables you to do, and possibly at night. We do one takeoff during the day and we do one takeoff at night. And once they've seen that they can apply that strategy low to the ground with a successful recovery, it really builds the confidence for the crew.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. We'll go back to the slide, and let me just add to that. We're not saying if you have simulators with snap to or fly to functions, we're not saying those are not useful. Absolutely, they are. But being able to hand fly airplanes into upsets can be used in different roles to add diversity, but also even having your pilots fly into the upset themselves, there is a certain level of learning that goes with that as they see and experience how an airplane gets to that upset, as opposed to all of a sudden just finding themselves there in a snap to. Another benefit of the simulator is the CRM aspect. You can't do that super well, say, in an on-aircraft environment like an aerobatic airplane there, but the simulator definitely can bring a crew together, and you've got lots of experience with this, lots of experience trying to teach your line pilots how to work together, learning what to say, especially for the pilot monitoring, or what not to say, that kind of thing. So CRM, is it fair to say, for you is an important part of the simulator UPRT?
Yeah, well, so the manufacturers have spent a lot of time recently emphasizing, well, not recently, but the benefits are the importance of pilot monitoring in the whole process. It used to be pilot flying, pilot not flying. So the pilot not flying would then be the guy looking out the window and doing the radio work. Now they obviously changed that to pilot monitoring, and with an emphasis on making sure that the pilot flying is carrying out the correct actions, etc. So once we've trained our crew in the strategy, and each of the 2 crew members have had a turn, if we were teaching to, have had a turn to practice the strategy, develop the confidence, apply the strategy correctly, we then sort of move to scenario-based training where we could maybe tell the captain or the first officer to act incapacitated, or we just find situations where the pilots are not applying the strategy correctly, and we emphasize there, and this can really only be done in a simulator because you're going through so many upsets in a simulator session, where the emphasis on pilot monitoring, CRM, the correct call-outs, the say and do techniques are emphasized there. And once again, you can freeze the simulator after the upset and discuss the CRM aspects, discuss the threat and errors that occurred during that and how could it have better been mitigated, etc. So it's a very important aspect to UPRT in terms of the simulator training, is the ability to emphasize the CRM aspects and the threat and error management.
Yeah, and we find that in general, the industry at large, I think, is not as good as they could be at this. And frankly, it comes from so many simulator instructors who really haven't had good UPRT training themselves. So they don't know necessarily what to impart. They don't even know the latest industry guidance that is now out there in recent years in terms of CRM and upsets. BJ.
So I think an important point here is that when you're looking to the industry for upset training, is we find that we're one of the few providers that actually provides CRM upset training. Most UPRT providers approach it from a single pilot challenge, and so they will get trained as a single pilot approach. And what we find in the simulator when we do the integrated program is that even though the crews are completely trained from a single pilot aspect, the CRM part of it can create delay and confusion if they haven't done it before. So, SOPs don't change in an airplane upset. They just are time compressed out of necessity, right? So it's important for them to be able to function as a crew. And very often the crews come in and realize their flight department or their operation doesn't actually have a protocol to how to deal with airplane upsets. And recognizing that in training is critical to winning in the real world. So anything you wanted to add to that, Honor?
No, it really is a great one to see crews that get a chance to experience this, and they see the challenges as they go from that single pilot effectiveness now to a crew. And there are some unique challenges when you have 2 pilots trying to work together in this time compressed way. So let's go to the slide again.
Okay. And the only other thing I would add there, Otter, would be that, depending on the on-aircraft platform, for example, we use the Grobe turboprop at a military location. We use the Slingsby in Europe. There is opportunity for some level of CRM that can be implemented. That's one advantage of side-by-side, but a limitation of side-by-side is the fact the single pilot value of it as well. So the challenge with doing on-aircraft CRM is very often there's not enough time to effectively introduce it. The simulator is a great place to do that.
All right, we're about ready to wrap this up, gang. I know we've gone a little bit, just a little over an hour here. I will just say that, the risks associated with simulator-only UPRT, probably the biggest ticket item is the lack of human factors training. Simulators are great for teaching a procedure. I mean, you can teach a pilot the actual, shall we say, procedural way of recovering. However, they will not be able to comprehensively learn how to apply a strategy or even how to apply a recovery procedure, if that's what's going to be taught, because you lack not only fidelity in the simulator, but you lack motion cues. Just, frankly, most motion cues in upset training is just simply not valid. And in fact, that's why Airbus in general disagrees with doing UPRT in the simulator with motion on. They say you should turn the motion off in general there because it could lead to negative training. there. Brad, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that the cues might be incorrect in terms of what you're experiencing compared to what we feel in a real aeroplane, we have found that by switching off the motion, the crews actually didn't pick it up. They were able to carry on with recognizing, visually seeing what they needed to see. But the importance of an instructor that can relay the effects of startle and the psychological effects of what's going to happen in a real life situation is very important. And to have a properly trained instructor who's done that on aircraft training, who's experienced that situation, and then can sell the strategy to the crew as something that is going to help them tremendously under a situation where they have severe cognitive impairment, is extremely important.
BJ.
Yeah, so Otter, we do have one more question here, but before we go to that, I think one thing to clarify that I think you didn't say, but you assumed, was the fact you can actually teach a strategy in a simulator. You can teach what to do and how to do it. And in fact, the easiest thing to teach in upset training is what to do and how to do it. The real challenge is being able to overcome the startle, the fear, the stress, because of the psychophysiological incapacitation that crews experience in those events to get access to your skill sets. So being conditioned in the real world to be able to function and take effective action is really, really critical, which is one of the reasons why on-aircraft training is just so critical to this process. But having said that, you can fully train a crew in the strategy. You can fully train them in every area of upset prevention and recovery training. But absent the human factors, there may be a large percentage of events they cannot actually apply those skill sets in, which is one of the reasons why the mitigation of simulation is down in the 40%, whereas on aircraft is in the high 70s, simply because of the human factor component of it. Anything to add to that before we go to the question?
No, I'm glad you clarified that, and that's exactly what I meant. And you're exactly right, and that's just what Brad saw with his crews. He was able to teach them effectively the strategy.
All right, guys. I know we talked about targeting 20 minutes, I think, in our event today. So I think it's a little bit long. Let me bring in the last question. It's actually one that Chris had talked about way early, and then I let him know we were going to hold off. But I think it's a great way to wrap up because it really talks about the outcomes that we see as a result of upset prevention and recovery training. So outcomes could be transferability, the efficiency, resilience of the graduate. What would you guys assess as the outcomes of effective upset prevention and recovery training? And I don't know that he's looking for anything specific here, but I think it's a good way to wrap up here, guys.
Brad, you want to start?
Sure. I know I have mentioned the incident that we had, the stall incident with the SA-260 over the Alps. For us, we saved 230 odd lives. So it was an extremely successful outcome. The investigators that did the report said that without the kind of UPRT training that the crew had received, they think the outcome would have been catastrophic. So just that alone, saving one life, has meant that we've done a great job. What we have also achieved is pilots' understanding of the extended envelope, a deeper understanding of aerodynamic principles that are involved, that they last perhaps read about when they did their licenses 10, 15 years ago, a better understanding of the maneuvering envelope of how an airplane is designed, how turbulence penetration speeds are calculated, how is an airplane going to behave should you slightly exceed any of the parameters, and that it's not something that they can't deal with. And I think overall, having pilots that are confident in the airplane, we had almost, I would say 90% of the guys that walked out of the simulator, in fact, even more, 99%, walked out of the first UPRT session that they had and said, I can't believe I've never done this training and I've been flying these airplanes for 30 years. How did we get away with it for so long?
Yeah, that's a great way to wrap that up especially for your pilots. and for the success of the training efforts that you went into. You spent a lot of hours with these guys and promoting a culture of safety around loss control in flight. And so we definitely salute you. I can say, I believe, and BJ helped me with this number, but I believe we're going on over 25 real saves of APS graduates. There have saved lives and real airplanes that specifically reached out to us, said, I encountered this upset, and it was the training that saved our lives there. The overall goal, obviously, is resilience in a pilot, to develop a confident competence that allows a pilot to be resilient in this literally infinite variety of upsets that a pilot could encounter. And I think the industry stakeholders at large have agreed that this UPRT is the way to that path there.
Well, I would add, Otter, that what we're talking about is people coming in saying they've been saved because they had to apply recovery. Now, remember, because of the enhanced awareness and prevention provided by a comprehensive upset prevention recovery training, there's probably countless numbers that recognize the developing event very early. They saw the preconditions developing. To a point you made earlier, is the more robust and comprehensive the training, all the way from awareness to prevention through recovery, we find that the recovery part of it dramatically enhances awareness and prevention. And so the fact that, airplanes got in situations where recovery was needed to prevent it, wonderful, but really the hallmark of any effective upset prevention or recovery training program is never to be there in the first place. And we regularly hear that proficiency in manual flight operations is improved, manual handling is improved, situation awareness, flight envelope awareness, all are direct outputs and consequences and outcomes, to Chris's point, of an effective UPRT program. So it is just more than just dealing with upsets. It's situational awareness. It's an overall enhanced pilot at the end of the day that is just a resilience and competence that has really been unparalleled in an effective UPRT program implementation. Is truly a paradigm shift in how we train pilots. So with that, final comments, guys, so we can wrap this up.
No, it's been great going through this with Brad and hearing again some of his testimonies and real life experiences and true success that they had at their airline. It's been great to have Brad as part of our APS instructor cadre, and looking forward to working with him in many years to come. I think the industry at large will enjoy having him as well as he expands his footprint in that area.
Brad, what do you have for us for wisdom to wrap things up?
Yeah, the importance of a properly trained instructor. Guys, it's been 1 hour, 18 minutes, and we haven't even touched what I would love to talk about in terms of successful programs, outcomes, and how to go about this whole topic. I'm always available for questions and to discuss upset prevention and recovery training. And I wish we had more time so that we could get deeper into it. But really appreciate your attendance today.
Did I hear you volunteer to come back for another live stream session there, Brad? Is that what you meant by that final comment?
Anytime.
I'll promise you we'll try to do 20 minutes again, just like we did today, but we'll see how it goes. I thought there was a lot of great questions. So thank you, everybody that's still on. I see there's a large number of people still out there watching the event today. Thank you, Otter, as always, for bringing your expertise to bear. And Brad, thank you so much for staying up late in South Africa to really join the industry to bring this information forward. So with that, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Otter. Thank you, Brad. We will see everybody next time.